You've seen it everywhere, but you've never truly seen it. That perfect black cube sitting in your city square, the sleek cubic logos on the buildings you pass daily, the geometric memorial you walked by last week without a second thought. From Manhattan's mysterious rotating cube at Astor Place to the sacred Kaaba that millions circle in devotion, this isn't random architectural choice. It's an ancient symbolic language hiding in plain sight. The cube represents something profound: perfect material structure, 6 faces, 12 edges, 8 corners, mathematical perfection that our ancestors understood as the fundamental building blocks of physical reality itself. They knew what we've forgotten. Geometry isn't just mathematics, it's metaphysics. Every symbol carries frequency, every shape programs consciousness. Ancient civilizations used the cube to represent both the material world's stability and its limitations, the very structure that grounds us while simultaneously defining our boundaries. Corporate headquarters, religious monuments, public art installations, they're all speaking the same geometric language. Once you understand this symbol's true significance, you'll never see your world the same way again. Look up at the night sky on any clear evening, and you'll see Saturn moving with a deliberate, almost regal pace across the heavens. While other planets dart and dance through their celestial choreography, Saturn takes its time, 29.5 years, to complete just one orbit around our Sun. Ancient astronomers noticed this immediately. They called it the slow wanderer, the planet that never rushed, never hurried, but whose influence, once felt, lasted for generations. This wasn't just astronomical curiosity to our ancestors. They understood something we've largely forgotten, that Saturn's measured movement reflected a cosmic principle of authority, structure, and time itself. When Saturn moved into a new constellation, empires rose and fell. When it aligned with other planets, the very foundations of civilization shifted. The ancients weren't being superstitious. They were observing patterns that modern science is only beginning to understand. The story begins in ancient Mesopotamia, where Saturn was known as Ninurta, a complex deity who governed war, agriculture, and divine judgment. Think about that combination for a moment. War destroys, agriculture builds, and judgment determines what deserves to survive. Ninurta embodied the harsh but necessary principle that creates order from chaos, even when that process involves destruction. The Mesopotamians understood that before you can plant new crops, you must clear the field. Before you can build lasting structures, you must have solid foundations. This is Saturn's essential nature, the cosmic force that says, "Not yet," until the proper groundwork is laid. As civilizations evolved, so did Saturn's mythology, but the core themes remained remarkably consistent. The Babylonians called him Kayamanu, meaning the steady one. They tracked his movements with obsessive precision, understanding that his cycles marked the great turning points of human history. When Saturn entered certain constellations, they knew to prepare for times of testing, limitation, and ultimately, transformation. The Greeks inherited this wisdom and gave us perhaps the most psychologically profound myth, Kronos, the Titan who devoured his own children to prevent being overthrown. On the surface, it's a horrific story, but look deeper, and you'll find one of the most accurate descriptions of time's nature ever conceived. Time literally consumes everything it creates. Every moment that comes into existence is immediately swallowed by the next. Every generation replaces the one before it. Every civilization builds upon the ruins of those that came before. But here's what most people miss about the Kronos myth. It's not just about destruction. Kronos represents the principle that nothing can exist without boundaries, without structure, without the framework that time provides. Yes, time limits us, but those very limitations make growth possible. A river needs banks to flow powerfully. A plant needs the resistance of soil to grow strong roots. Consciousness itself needs the structure of time to have experiences and learn from them. The Romans understood this when they transformed Kronos into Saturn and associated him with the Golden Age, that mythical time when humanity lived in perfect harmony and abundance. But here's the paradox they recognized. The Golden Age was also a time of spiritual dormancy. Humans were comfortable, safe, provided for, but they weren't growing, weren't evolving, weren't becoming more than they were. Saturn's gift isn't just structure and limitation, it's the creative tension that forces evolution. This is why traditional astrology called Saturn the Great Malefic, not because he was evil, but because his lessons come through difficulty, delay, and testing. Saturn doesn't give you what you want when you want it. He gives you what you need when you're ready to handle it responsibly. He's the cosmic teacher who refuses to give you the answers until you've done the homework. The stern father who knows that too much too soon will weaken rather than strengthen you. What's fascinating is how modern space exploration has revealed Saturn's mysteries in ways that seem to validate ancient intuitions. NASA's Cassini mission discovered that Saturn emits more energy than it receives from the Sun. It's literally generating power from within. Just as the ancients said, it represented self-contained authority. Even more intriguing is the hexagonal storm at Saturn's North Pole, a perfectly geometric, six-sided structure that has maintained its shape for decades. Nature rarely creates such precise geometric forms. Yet there it is, a massive hexagon spinning at Saturn's crown, like some cosmic symbol of order imposed upon chaos. The most profound connections between these ancient observations and modern discoveries are often too sensitive for mainstream platforms, which is why researchers who want to go deeper should explore the protected discussions at Insights Academy, where we can examine the full implications of what Saturn represents in our current historical moment. The hexagon itself is deeply significant. In sacred geometry, the hexagon represents the perfect balance between the spiritual and material realms. It's the shape that appears when opposing forces reach equilibrium. Think of how snowflakes form, or how bees naturally create hexagonal honeycombs for maximum efficiency. Saturn is literally wearing this symbol at its pole, broadcasting the principle it represents throughout our solar system. But Saturn's influence goes far beyond astronomy or mythology. In depth psychology, Saturn represents what Carl Jung called the Senex archetype, the wise old man, who can be either mentor or tyrant, depending on how we relate to his energy. When we work with Saturn consciously, he becomes the inner teacher who helps us build lasting structures in our lives. When we resist his lessons, he becomes the harsh taskmaster who forces growth through crisis and limitation. This is why Saturn returns. Those periods roughly every 7 years, when Saturn returns to the same position it occupied at your birth, are universally recognized as times of major life transitions. At age 7, you start school and begin learning society's rules. At 14, you hit adolescence and start questioning authority. At 21, you legally become an adult. At 28-29, you experience your first Saturn return and often make major life changes, career shifts, marriages, divorces, relocations. The pattern continues throughout life because Saturn's energy demands periodic restructuring, periodic clearing away of what no longer serves. There's more to this than we can say openly. Some truths are too sensitive, too sacred for this platform. That's why we created Insights Academy, a free newsletter where we go deeper, where we share what can't be said here. And for a limited time, if you sign up using the link in the description, you'll receive a free copy of the Kybalion, a foundational Hermetic text Thoth would have guarded himself. Here's what the ancients understood that we've forgotten. Saturn isn't the enemy of freedom. He's the force that makes true freedom possible. Without structure, there's only chaos. Without limitations, there's no framework for growth. Without time's pressure, there's no motivation to evolve. Saturn represents the cosmic principle that allows infinite consciousness to have finite experiences, that creates the playing field where souls can learn, grow, and eventually transcend the very limitations that made their growth possible. The black cube, as we'll see, becomes the perfect symbol for this Saturnian principle, the geometric form that represents three-dimensional reality itself, the framework within which all material experience occurs. But first, we need to understand how this ancient planetary archetype became woven into the very fabric of human civilization, creating structures of power and control that most people never recognize, let alone question. When you look at a simple cube, you're not just seeing a geometric shape, you're witnessing the fundamental blueprint of how infinite consciousness gets trapped in finite reality. The ancient mystery schools understood something that modern education has completely forgotten. Geometry isn't abstract mathematics. It's the actual architecture of existence itself. Think about this for a moment. Every sacred tradition, from the Pythagorean schools to the Egyptian priesthood, treated geometric forms as living principles. They knew that when you study a triangle, you're not learning about angles and measurements. You're discovering how force, resistance, and manifestation interact in the physical world. When you contemplate a circle, you're exploring the nature of infinity, completion, and the eternal return. But the cube represents something far more complex and, frankly, more troubling. It's the geometric embodiment of limitation itself. Here's what the ancient initiates understood about the cube's metaphysical structure. While the circle represents the infinite, no beginning, no end, pure potential flowing endlessly, the cube represents the exact opposite. It's infinite spirit compressed into finite form. 6 faces, 8 corners, 12 edges. Everything measurable, everything contained, everything bounded by rigid laws and limitations. The cube doesn't just sit in space randomly. Its structure maps perfectly onto the fundamental directions of physical reality: north, south, east, west, above, and below. Every point within the cube can be measured, catalogued, and predicted. It's a complete model of material existence where everything follows rules, where everything has boundaries, where everything is knowable and controllable. Now here's where this gets really fascinating. The ancient geometers discovered something remarkable when they unfolded a cube. When you take a cube and unfold it flat, what shape do you get? A cross. This isn't coincidence. It's encoded wisdom that reveals one of the most profound spiritual truths ever discovered. The mathematical transformation from cube to cross shows us that suffering and sacrifice emerge directly from material existence itself. When infinite consciousness gets folded into the cube of physical reality, the cross of limitation, struggle, and ultimately, redemption becomes inevitable. But here's the deeper truth. Just as you can fold a cross back into a cube, you can also unfold the cube and transcend its limitations. The Hermetic traditions taught that every symbol contains multiple layers of meaning. The cube to cross transformation reveals that material existence isn't punishment. It's a voluntary descent of consciousness that contains within itself the seeds of its own transcendence. The cross points in 4 directions, but it also points toward a center, toward integration, toward the possibility of rising above the horizontal plane of material limitation. In the classical elemental system, the cube corresponds to Earth, the densest, most inert element. Earth provides stability, structure, and foundation, but it also creates the greatest resistance to change. When consciousness identifies completely with the cube, with material form, it gains security and predictability but loses fluidity and infinite potential. The Kabbalistic tradition maps this principle precisely. The cube represents Malkuth, the kingdom, the 10th and final sphere on the tree of life. Malkuth is where all the higher spiritual emanations finally crystallize into physical manifestation. It's the realm where abstract divine principles become concrete, measurable reality. Everything above Malkuth is invisible, infinite, and free-flowing. Everything within Malkuth follows the laws of the cube, bounded, limited, and subject to decay. Eastern traditions recognize this same principle in the root chakra, Muladhara. Located at the base of the spine, this energy center governs survival, material security, and our connection to physical existence. When this chakra dominates consciousness, we experience reality through the cube's perspective. Everything becomes about safety, control, accumulation, and defending boundaries. The cube consciousness asks, how can I secure my position? How can I control my environment? How can I build walls strong enough to protect what's mine? But here's the psychological dimension that most people never consider. The cube doesn't just represent external physical reality. It represents the structure of the ego itself. Your personality, your mental patterns, your habitual ways of thinking and responding, all of this forms a kind of psychological cube around your consciousness. This ego cube serves important functions. It organizes experience, creates continuity of identity, and helps you navigate physical reality efficiently. But when consciousness becomes completely identified with this cube structure, when you think you are the cube rather than the awareness experiencing through it, that's when the cube becomes a prison. The ego cube creates rigid categories. This is me. That is not me. This is safe. That is dangerous. This fits my identity. That threatens it. These mental constructs become like the faces of a cube, solid barriers that seem to protect you but actually limit your perception and possibility. Now, when we encounter the black cube, all these meanings intensify dramatically. Black isn't just absence of color. It's the color of mystery, of the hidden, of potential waiting to be actualized. The black cube represents the shadow aspect of material existence, the concealed knowledge embedded in physical reality itself. In alchemical traditions, the black phase, the nigredo, represents the necessary descent into matter before transformation can occur. The black cube embodies this principle. It's not evil, but it is concealed. It contains tremendous power and knowledge, but that knowledge is encrypted, hidden within the very structure of limitation itself. When you begin to understand the black cube as a symbol system, you realize why it appears so frequently in esoteric traditions and, as we explored earlier, in our contemporary institutions. It's not just decoration, it's a recognition of the fundamental principle that consciousness must descend into limitation in order to eventually transcend it. The question becomes, are you conscious of the cube, or is the cube controlling your consciousness? Because here's the ultimate secret the mystery schools taught. The same geometric principles that can imprison awareness can also liberate it. The cube's structure, fully understood, contains the keys to its own transcendence. The ancient initiates knew that sacred geometry wasn't just theoretical knowledge, it was practical technology for consciousness transformation. When you truly comprehend the cube's metaphysical structure, you begin to recognize these same patterns operating in your own psyche, in your relationships, in the very fabric of the reality you're experiencing. And once you see the cube clearly, you can begin to work with it consciously instead of being unconsciously controlled by it. When you examine the archaeological record, something extraordinary emerges from the dust and stone of our ancestors. They weren't just building temples and altars randomly. They were encoding profound cosmic principles into their most sacred spaces, and the cube was central to this ancient wisdom. Let me take you back to Mesopotamia, where civilization first learned to read the stars. The Sumerians didn't just worship their gods, they understood something we've largely forgotten. In the ruins of Babylon, archaeologists have uncovered temple complexes where cubic altars were positioned with mathematical precision, aligned not just with cardinal directions, but with Saturn's orbital patterns. These weren't primitive people throwing together stone blocks. They were sophisticated astronomers who recognized that geometric forms could channel and stabilize cosmic energies. The Babylonians took this even further. Their ziggurats, those massive stepped pyramids, were built using cubic measurements that reflected Saturn's 29 5-year orbital cycle. Every brick, every angle, every sacred chamber was designed to create resonance with what they called the Great Stabilizer. They understood that Saturn's energy, when properly channeled through cubic architecture, could bring order to chaos, preserve knowledge through dark ages, and maintain social stability across generations. But here's where it gets fascinating. The Babylonians discovered that these cubic sacred spaces had to be consecrated during specific Saturn transits. They weren't just building temples, they were creating cosmic batteries that could store and transmit Saturnian principles of divine order. The geometric perfection of the cube became their technology for bridging heaven and earth. Now, when we move to Egypt, we see this same understanding expressed through different symbols. Ptah, one of their most revered creator deities, embodied everything Saturn represents: wisdom, architecture, time, and the imposing of divine order upon primordial chaos. But Ptah's priests didn't just worship him. They became master geometricians who understood that pyramid construction was actually an advanced form of Saturnian magic. Think about the Great Pyramid for a moment. Its base is essentially a square, a cube's foundation, and every measurement reflects the same geometric principles that govern Saturn's influence on material reality. The Egyptians weren't building tombs. They were constructing massive geometric engines designed to preserve divine knowledge and maintain cosmic order. The precision required wasn't just impressive engineering. It was sacred technology that demonstrated their deep understanding of how cubic geometry channels Saturnian energy. The Phoenicians, those master traders and navigators, carried this wisdom across the Mediterranean through their worship of El, the stern sky father whose characteristics perfectly mirror Saturn's archetypal energy. El represented divine justice, cosmic authority, and the kind of paternal wisdom that builds lasting civilizations. But here's the crucial connection most people miss. When Hebrew scribes later wrote about Elohim, they were adapting Phoenician concepts of El, subtly weaving Saturnian energy into the very foundation of monotheistic tradition. This is why the Sabbath, Saturn's day, became the 7th day of rest in Hebrew culture. It wasn't just about taking a break from work. The Sabbath represents a weekly recalibration with Saturnian principles, a time for spiritual communion with divine gravity and cosmic order. Every 7th day, observant practitioners align themselves with the same energy that ancient civilizations channeled through their cubic altars and geometric temples. The Romans understood this connection so well that they created Saturnalia, a festival that most people today completely misunderstand. Modern interpretations focus on the role reversals, the temporary chaos of slaves becoming masters. But the deeper purpose was far more sophisticated. The Romans recognized that every ordered system must periodically confront its opposite, that every structure must be tested by chaos to prove its stability. Saturnalia wasn't just celebration, it was controlled demolition that strengthened social order by acknowledging the shadow forces that lurk beneath surface stability. Throughout all these civilizations, we see the same architectural evidence repeating: black stones incorporated into sacred spaces, cubic altars, positioned with astronomical precision, geometric perfection that reflects Saturn's influence on material reality. These weren't decorative choices, they were functional elements in a technology we've largely forgotten. The Masonic tradition preserved much of this ancient knowledge through their symbolism of the rough ashlar and perfect ashlar. The rough stone represents the human soul in its natural, chaotic state. The perfect cube represents that same soul after spiritual refinement, geometric perfection achieved through discipline and wisdom. Their black and white checkered floors aren't just decorative patterns. They represent the fundamental duality that Saturn governs, the eternal dance between order and chaos, structure and freedom. What's remarkable is how these same principles continue manifesting in contemporary architecture. Walk into any major bank, courthouse, or government building, and you'll find the same cubic proportions, the same geometric precision, the same use of black stone and perfect angles that characterized ancient Saturnian temples. Modern corporate headquarters unconsciously employ the same architectural principles that Babylonian priests used to channel cosmic stability. This isn't coincidence. It's evidence that certain geometric forms carry inherent power to influence consciousness and social organization. Whether the architects realize it or not, they're tapping into the same Saturnian energy that our ancestors understood and deliberately cultivated. The next time you enter a building with cubic architecture, black stone elements, or geometric precision, pause for a moment. Feel how the space affects your consciousness. Notice how these environments naturally evoke feelings of authority, permanence, and structured order. You're experiencing the same architectural principles that have channeled Saturnian energy for thousands of years. Our ancestors weren't primitive. They were sophisticated cosmic engineers who understood how to work with planetary energies through sacred geometry. The cube wasn't just a symbol to them, it was functional technology for maintaining civilization itself. Look around you right now. That sleek smartphone in your hand, the cubic buildings outside your window, the geometric patterns in corporate logos. You see dozens of times each day. The ancient symbol we've been exploring hasn't disappeared. It's evolved, multiplied, and embedded itself so deeply into our modern world that we barely notice its presence anymore. Let's start with the most obvious example, one that involves nearly 2 billion people on Earth. Every year, millions of Muslims journey to Mecca for Hajj, where they perform the tawaf, circling 7 times around the Kaaba, a perfect black cube draped in silk at the center of the Grand Mosque. Now, I'm not making any religious judgment here. What's fascinating is the pure geometry of this ritual. Millions of human beings moving in concentric circles around a black cube, creating a massive spiral of human energy that can literally be seen from space. From a sacred geometry perspective, this represents one of the most powerful ritual formations on the planet. The cube anchors the center, while human consciousness moves in the ancient pattern of the spiral, the same pattern we see in galaxies, seashells, and DNA. Whether you view this through a religious, spiritual, or purely geometric lens, you're witnessing the same archetypal forces we discussed in earlier sections playing out on an enormous scale. But the Kaaba is just the most visible example. Walk through Manhattan and you'll encounter the Alamo Cube at Astor Place, a massive black cube that people spin, sit on, and interact with daily without giving it a second thought. Similar cubic installations appear in Melbourne's Federation Square, Berlin's financial district, and dozens of other major cities. Notice where these cubes are placed: financial centers, memorial spaces, transportation hubs. These aren't random locations. Saturn has always governed systems, laws, commerce, and memory. Ancient astrologers understood this planet as the great organizer, the force that creates structure and boundaries. When you see cubic monuments in financial districts, you're witnessing modern urban planners unconsciously following the same archetypal patterns that guided ancient temple builders. Take a moment to examine the corporate logos you encounter every day. Microsoft's four-square window, the cubic designs of countless tech companies. Financial institutions love geometric precision, those interlocking squares, hexagonal patterns, and stark black and white contrasts that suggest order, reliability, and control over complex systems. These companies aren't consciously invoking Saturn symbolism, but they're tapping into something deeper, the psychological association between geometric perfection and systematic power. The rise of cubic modernism in the 20th century tells an even more revealing story. The Bauhaus movement stripped away organic curves, natural materials, and mystical ornamentation in favor of clean lines, right angles, and functional efficiency. Compare a Gothic cathedral with its soaring arches and nature-inspired details to a modern office building. Perfect rectangles stacked into cubes, windows arranged in rigid grids, materials that deny any connection to the natural world. This architectural shift reflects a broader transformation in human consciousness. We moved from spaces designed to inspire wonder and connect us to something greater, toward environments optimized for productivity and control. When you spend 8 hours a day in a cubic office building, surrounded by right angles and artificial lighting, something subtle happens to your psyche. The organic, creative aspects of consciousness get compressed, while the analytical, systematic parts get reinforced. I've noticed this in my own experience working in different environments. Creative thinking flows more easily in spaces with natural light, curved lines, and organic materials. But put someone in a windowless cubic conference room with fluorescent lighting, and watch how the conversation becomes more rigid, more focused on procedures and limitations rather than possibilities. This connects directly to what urban planners call smart cities. Environments where every aspect of human movement and behavior gets monitored, analyzed, and optimized through algorithmic systems. The physical cube becomes a digital cube, containing and directing consciousness through invisible but equally powerful geometric constraints. Consider how Holocaust memorials and trauma monuments consistently use dark geometric forms, fields of concrete blocks, angular metallic structures, stark cubic installations. The memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin consists of two 711 concrete blocks arranged in a grid pattern, creating a maze-like environment that evokes disorientation and solemnity. These designs work because they tap into the cube's archetypal function as a symbol of unavoidable reality, karmic consequence, and the weight of historical memory. Even our entertainment spaces follow these patterns. Movie theaters are dark rectangular boxes where we sit in rows, facing a rectangular screen, consuming narratives that often reinforce systematic thinking rather than inspiring genuine creativity or spiritual growth. Shopping malls create cubic environments designed to channel human movement and desire towards specific commercial outcomes. The psychological effects of living within these geometric containers are profound but subtle. Cubic environments tend to suppress imagination while reinforcing conformity. They create what environmental psychologists call learned helplessness, the feeling that individual creativity and natural impulses must be subordinated to systematic requirements. But here's what's truly remarkable. Most people living within these cubic systems feel a persistent sense that something is missing. Depression, anxiety, and spiritual emptiness have skyrocketed precisely as our environments have become more geometrically perfect and systematically controlled. The ancient wisdom keepers understood that human consciousness needs organic diversity, natural rhythms, and connection to larger cosmic patterns to thrive. The cube isn't inherently evil. It represents one necessary aspect of existence, the force that creates structure and enables complex civilization. But when cubic consciousness dominates without balance from organic, creative, and spiritual influences, it becomes a prison rather than a foundation. Start noticing the cubes around you. Count how many rectangular screens you look at each day. Observe how different you feel in natural outdoor spaces versus cubic indoor environments. Pay attention to which corporate logos use geometric patterns and which spaces in your city feature prominent cubic installations. This awareness isn't about paranoia, it's about conscious choice. When you understand how environmental geometry affects consciousness, you can make intentional decisions about the spaces you inhabit and create. The ancient temple builders knew these secrets. Now you do too. When you see the black cube symbol appearing across ancient temples, modern corporate logos, and public monuments, you're witnessing something far more sophisticated than mere decoration. In the world of occult traditions, symbols aren't just representations, they're actual keys that unlock inner realities and connect us to cosmic forces. The black cube vibrates with Saturn's dense transformative energy, and here's what most people don't understand. This energy can either imprison you or initiate you, depending entirely on how you approach it. Think about this for a moment. Every genuine mystery school throughout history has recognized that spiritual awakening isn't about escaping the material world. It's about mastering your relationship with it. The Gnostics understood this paradox centuries ago. They saw the cubic material realm as a trap created by the demiurge, a false god who wanted to keep souls locked in ignorance. But here's where it gets fascinating. They also recognize that this same material world serves as an essential testing ground where souls can awaken through gnosis, direct, spiritual knowledge that comes from within. The Gnostic texts describe how the soul must navigate through the cubic prison of matter, not to remain trapped, but to develop the strength and wisdom necessary for true liberation. It's like a cosmic gymnasium, where consciousness builds its spiritual muscles by working against resistance. Now, let's dive into the alchemical tradition, where this same principle appears in a different form. Medieval alchemists weren't just trying to turn lead into gold, they were mapping the transformation of human consciousness. Saturn represents lead in their system, the heaviest, most resistant metal, dense and difficult to work with. But here's the crucial insight. Lead serves as the starting point for the great work. You can't begin the alchemical process without first acknowledging and working with this heavy, Saturnian energy. The black cube corresponds perfectly to what alchemists called the nigredo phase, the blackening. This is where the ego must dissolve and decay before any real transformation can occur. I've studied countless alchemical texts, and they all emphasize the same point. You cannot skip this phase. The practitioner must enter the darkness, face the shadow, and allow the false self to decompose. Only then can the albedo, whitening, and rubedo, reddening phases follow, leading to the creation of spiritual gold. The Kabbalistic tradition offers another layer of understanding through the sephira called Bina, understanding. This is the third sphere on the tree of life, representing structure, form, and what's known as the divine feminine principle of restriction. Now, restriction might sound negative, but Kabbalists recognize it as absolutely essential. Without boundaries and limitations, nothing can manifest. The cube's rigid structure reflects Bina's function, creating the necessary constraints that allow infinite potential to take specific form. When I examine how ceremonial magicians have worked with cubic symbolism throughout history, a fascinating pattern emerges. Practitioners create sacred cubic spaces, their magic circles, that serve as laboratories of consciousness. The four cardinal directions, the above and below, the center point where the magician stands. This creates a cubic framework that contains and focuses energy. But here's what's remarkable. They use the cube structure as a launching pad to access realms beyond form. The limitation becomes the doorway to transcendence. The tarot reveals this same principle through specific cards that embody different aspects of our relationship with cubic reality. The World card shows the completion of the material journey, a figure dancing within a wreath that represents the mastery of form. The Devil card depicts souls chained to a cubic pedestal. But look closely. The chains are loose enough to remove, suggesting that bondage comes from unconscious desires rather than external force. The Tower shows the destruction of false structures, those rigid belief systems and ego constructs that must collapse before genuine awakening can occur. These three cards map the complete arc of the soul's relationship with cubic limitation. Initial entrapment, the realization that freedom is possible, and the destruction of illusions that leads to authentic liberation. Modern depth psychology has rediscovered these ancient insights through shadow work. Carl Jung recognized that psychological integration requires entering what we might call the cube of the unconscious, those dark, rejected aspects of the self that we've pushed into the basement of awareness. The shadow contains everything we've deemed unacceptable about ourselves, but it also holds tremendous creative energy. You cannot become whole by avoiding this cubic underworld. You must descend, explore, and reclaim these rejected parts. This brings us to the fundamental paradox that every authentic spiritual tradition eventually encounters. Mastering form is necessary to transcend form. You cannot bypass Saturn's lessons through spiritual bypassing or wishful thinking. The energy must be worked with consciously, deliberately, and with respect for its transformative power. Contemporary practitioners who understand this principle approach the black cube not as something to fear or worship, but as a tool for conscious evolution. They recognize that Saturn's restrictive energy, when worked with skillfully, becomes the very force that builds spiritual strength and discernment. The question isn't whether you'll encounter the black cube's energy in your spiritual journey, it's whether you'll work with it consciously or remain unconsciously bound by it. Every limitation you face, every boundary you encounter, every moment when life feels heavy and resistant, these are opportunities to apply the ancient wisdom that transforms lead into gold. The mystery schools knew something that our modern world has largely forgotten. The path to freedom leads directly through the heart of limitation itself. What if I told you that the ancient understanding of planetary influence wasn't mystical nonsense, but cutting-edge physics that we're only now beginning to rediscover? The universe our ancestors knew wasn't a cold mechanical clockwork. It was a living symphony of frequencies, where everything from your thoughts to distant planets exists as vibrational patterns dancing at different densities. This changes everything about how we understand Saturn's influence on human consciousness. Modern science has stumbled onto something remarkable. NASA's Cassini mission, during its 13-year dance around Saturn, detected something unprecedented: consistent electromagnetic emissions flowing from the planet in complex, almost musical patterns. Unlike any other planet in our solar system, Saturn broadcasts a steady stream of radio waves that scientists describe as eerily organized, structured, intentional. But here's where it gets fascinating. At Saturn's North Pole sits something that shouldn't exist according to conventional weather science. A perfect hexagonal storm that's been raging for decades. This isn't some chaotic swirl like Jupiter's Great Red Spot. This is geometric precision on a planetary scale. A six-sided structure, so mathematically perfect it looks artificial. Think about that hexagon for a moment. When you view a cube from certain angles, what do you see? A hexagon. The same six-sided geometry that's been encoded in religious architecture, corporate logos, and urban planning, the very symbols we explored earlier, is literally carved into Saturn's atmosphere, visible from space. The implications are staggering. This hexagon isn't just a weather pattern, it's functioning like a massive cosmic antenna, a frequency generator broadcasting carrier waves across the solar system. The electromagnetic signatures Cassini detected aren't random planetary noise. They're structured transmissions that interact with Earth's electromagnetic environment in ways we're only beginning to understand. Your body operates as a biological frequency receiver. Every cell in your system responds to electromagnetic fields. Your brain generates measurable electrical patterns. Your heart creates an electromagnetic field 8 times stronger than your brain's. Ancient spiritual traditions understood this. They knew that planetary bodies could influence human consciousness not through mystical forces, but through actual electromagnetic resonance. Here's the theory that's emerging from cutting-edge consciousness research. Saturn functions as the primary transmitter in a cosmic communication network. Saturn broadcasts. The Moon amplifies and relays these signals, and Earth receives them. Your consciousness, operating within Earth's electromagnetic field, becomes influenced by these planetary transmissions, whether you're aware of it or not. This isn't science fiction. We know that electromagnetic fields affect biological systems. We know that certain frequencies can induce specific brainwave states. We know that disrupting natural electromagnetic environments impacts everything from sleep patterns to emotional stability. The question isn't whether planetary electromagnetic fields influence consciousness, it's how much and what kind of influence they're having. Look around at what's happening to human consciousness in the digital age. As we've surrounded ourselves with artificial electromagnetic fields, cell towers, Wi-Fi networks, smart devices constantly pulsing with frequencies, people report feeling more disconnected from their intuitive abilities, more anxious, more spiritually numb. The correlation is hard to ignore. Consider this. Traditional cultures scheduled important activities around planetary positions because they observed real, measurable effects on human behavior and consciousness. They weren't being superstitious, they were being scientific, working with observable patterns that modern civilization has forgotten in our rush to electrify everything. The Saturn frequency theory suggests that certain planetary configurations can broadcast limiting frequencies that suppress higher consciousness states. Think of it as cosmic static interfering with your natural spiritual reception. When Saturn's hexagonal transmitter aligns with lunar amplification cycles, these limiting frequencies become stronger, making it harder to access expanded awareness, creativity, and spiritual connection. But here's what the ancient mystery schools understood that we're rediscovering. Consciousness isn't passive. You're not just a receiver, you're also a transmitter. When you generate higher internal frequencies through specific practices, you can override external programming, whether it's coming from planetary sources or human-created systems. Meditation isn't just relaxation, it's frequency tuning. When you sit in silence and focus your attention, you're literally changing your brain's electromagnetic patterns, shifting from lower frequency beta waves associated with anxiety and mental chatter to higher frequency gamma waves linked to expanded awareness and spiritual experiences. Sound healing works because specific frequencies can entrain your nervous system, pulling you out of limiting frequency ranges and into more expansive states. This is why chanting, singing bowls, and even certain types of music can instantly shift your consciousness. You're using sound to retune your personal frequency away from whatever external influences might be limiting your awareness. Spending time in nature provides electromagnetic grounding. The Earth itself generates a specific frequency called the Schumann resonance, approximately 783 Hz, which matches the alpha brainwave state associated with relaxed awareness and creativity. When you walk barefoot on grass, swim in natural water, or simply sit under trees, you're synchronizing with Earth's natural frequency rather than the artificial electromagnetic soup of modern civilization. The awakening process, from this perspective, involves learning to generate and maintain higher internal frequencies, regardless of external conditions. It's about developing what you might call frequency sovereignty, the ability to choose your consciousness state, rather than having it chosen for you by planetary transmissions, digital devices, or social programming. This connects directly to why certain practices have been preserved across cultures and centuries. Breathwork changes your electromagnetic state. Yoga and Tai Chi create coherent frequency patterns in your biofield. Even simple practices like gratitude and compassion generate measurable changes in your heart's electromagnetic field. The key insight here is that you're not a victim of cosmic frequencies. You're a conscious participant in a vast electromagnetic symphony. When you understand how the game is played, you can learn to play it masterfully, using the same principles that might otherwise limit you to instead expand your consciousness and spiritual abilities. The most profound prison isn't made of iron bars or concrete walls. It's constructed from thoughts, beliefs, and patterns that feel so natural, so much like you, that questioning them seems impossible. Yet this invisible cube within your mind might be the most sophisticated control system ever devised. Think about how you respond when someone challenges your core beliefs. Notice that immediate defensive reaction, the way your mind instantly constructs arguments to protect what you've always known to be true. That's not just disagreement, that's the cube defending itself. Your psychological structure operates like a fortress, complete with walls, guards, and alarm systems designed to keep certain ideas out and others locked safely inside. Carl Jung spent decades mapping these internal territories, discovering that our psyche organizes itself into rigid compartments. The persona, the mask we show the world, sits in one corner of the cube. The shadow, everything we've rejected about ourselves, gets banished to another. Our collection of shoulds and musts occupies another section, while our deepest fears huddle in the darkest corner, rarely acknowledged, but always influencing our choices. This isn't accidental architecture. From your earliest memories, external forces have been shaping the blueprint of your internal cube. Every time a parent said, "Good children don't get angry," another wall went up, separating you from your natural emotional range. Each time you learned that certain thoughts were bad or wrong, another compartment sealed shut. The education system, religious institutions, media, and social conditioning all contributed materials to build this structure that would contain your consciousness for decades. But here's where it gets fascinating and disturbing. The cube isn't just personal. There are collective cubes, mass psychological structures that entire societies share. Walk into any corporate office, and you'll witness thousands of people operating within nearly identical mental frameworks. They've internalized the same definitions of success, the same fears about security, the same beliefs about what's possible. The collective cube maintains social order by ensuring most people think within acceptable parameters. These shared mental structures explain why revolutionary ideas often seem to emerge simultaneously in different places. When the collective cube begins shifting, multiple individuals start bumping against the same walls at once. But for every person who breaks through, thousands more retreat deeper into familiar patterns, choosing the comfort of known limitations over the uncertainty of expanded consciousness. The defense mechanisms built into your personal cube are remarkably sophisticated. Rationalization transforms uncomfortable truths into acceptable stories. Projection takes internal conflicts and places them safely outside, onto other people or circumstances. Denial simply refuses to acknowledge information that doesn't fit existing structures. These mechanisms aren't character flaws. They're intelligent systems designed to protect a fragile sense of self from overwhelming complexity. Yet, what protects also imprisons. The same mental walls that shield you from unbearable truths also block access to your full potential. The compartments that organize overwhelming experience also fragment your wholeness. The patterns that provide stability also prevent growth. This is the cube's ultimate paradox. It's simultaneously your salvation and your limitation. When people begin serious spiritual or psychological work, they inevitably encounter their internal cube directly. Meditation reveals the repetitive nature of thought patterns. Therapy exposes the automatic responses that run your relationships. Shadow work forces confrontation with disowned aspects of self. Each practice essentially involves exploring your psychological architecture, mapping the corridors and chambers where different aspects of experience have been stored. This exploration often triggers what mystics call the dark night of the soul. As you examine the cube's construction, some walls begin crumbling before new structures emerge to replace them. The temporary dissolution creates chaos, disorientation, and fear. Who are you if not your familiar patterns? What remains when long-held beliefs dissolve? This period feels like psychological death because, in many ways, it is. Dreams during these transformation periods frequently feature cube imagery, boxes that won't open, rooms with no exits, geometric structures that shift and change. Your unconscious mind is processing the dismantling and reconstruction of fundamental psychological architecture. These aren't random symbols, but precise representations of internal structural changes. Modern therapeutic approaches, whether cognitive behavioral therapy, psychoanalysis, or trauma-informed practices, essentially involve cube renovation. You identify dysfunctional patterns, trace their origins, and consciously construct healthier alternatives. The process requires tremendous courage because it means temporarily destabilizing the very structures that have defined your reality. But here's the crucial insight that many spiritual seekers miss. You need a well-functioning cube before you can safely transcend it. Attempting to dissolve ego structure without first establishing psychological stability often leads to spiritual bypassing or psychological fragmentation. The cube must be strong enough to provide a secure foundation for consciousness to explore beyond its boundaries. The goal isn't to destroy your internal cube, but to become its conscious architect rather than its unconscious prisoner. This means recognizing when patterns serve you and when they limit you. It means developing the flexibility to modify structures that no longer fit your expanding awareness, while maintaining enough stability to function effectively in the world. The question isn't whether you have an internal cube. You do. The question is whether you'll remain its unconscious inhabitant or become its conscious designer. This recognition marks the beginning of true psychological freedom and the foundation for authentic spiritual development. Now we reach the most crucial understanding in this entire exploration. True liberation from the black cube doesn't come from running away or pretending it doesn't exist. That's spiritual bypassing, and Saturn sees right through it. The path forward requires something far more courageous. You must enter the cube fully, understand its mechanisms intimately, and transform it from your prison into your temple. This goes against every New Age fantasy about transcendence. You can't meditate your way out of physical reality, or affirm yourself beyond the laws that govern this dimension. The cube represents structure, limitation, and form, and these aren't obstacles to enlightenment. They're the very conditions that make conscious awakening possible. A diamond forms under pressure. Spiritual mastery emerges through engagement with resistance, not escape from it. The first stage of this transformation begins with recognition. You must become brutally honest about the constructed limitations you've accepted without question. We've explored how Saturn's influence creates psychological structures in your mind, but now you need to map your personal cube with precision. What beliefs about yourself have you never examined? Which cultural programming runs so deep you mistake it for natural law? What spiritual concepts have you adopted that actually keep you small? This recognition phase often feels uncomfortable, even disturbing. Your soul begins to feel suffocated by patterns that once provided security. You might experience restlessness in relationships that no longer match your expanding awareness. Career paths that once excited you feel hollow. Spiritual practices that used to bring peace now feel mechanical. This discomfort isn't a sign something's wrong. It's your consciousness outgrowing its current container. Many people panic at this stage and try to return to old comfort zones. They suppress the awakening impulse because growth feels threatening to the ego structure they've built. But this resistance actually strengthens the cube's hold. Fighting Saturn's lessons only proves you haven't learned them yet. The planet of discipline has infinite patience and will keep presenting the same challenges until you develop the wisdom to work with them consciously. The real work begins with shadow integration. Every face of your internal cube must be examined and brought into conscious awareness. This means looking at the parts of yourself you've denied, rejected, or hidden. The perfectionist who can't accept failure. The people pleaser who's lost their authentic voice. The rebel who defines themselves through opposition rather than genuine choice. The victim who blames external circumstances for internal states. Traditional therapy can support this process, but spiritual liberation requires going deeper than psychological healing. You're not just resolving trauma, you're examining the very structure of identity itself. Who would you be without your story of limitation? What remains when you stop defining yourself through your wounds, achievements, or roles? Meditation becomes essential here, but not the kind that seeks blissful escape. You need practices that help you observe mental structures without being trapped by them. Sit with uncomfortable emotions without trying to fix or transcend them. Watch thoughts arise and dissolve without identifying with their content. Notice how consciousness itself remains unchanged, while experiences flow through it like weather patterns. Breathwork offers another powerful tool for cube transformation. Your breathing patterns reflect your relationship with life force itself. Shallow, restricted breathing mirrors psychological constriction. As you learn to breathe with full capacity, you're literally expanding your ability to receive and express energy. Specific techniques like alternate nostril breathing help balance the solar and lunar aspects of consciousness, while breath retention practices build the internal pressure necessary for genuine transformation. Sound healing works directly with frequency, helping retune your personal vibration. Remember, Saturn broadcasts specific frequencies that influence consciousness. But you're not a passive receiver. You can consciously work with sound to shift your energetic state. Whether through chanting, singing bowls, or simply humming, you're learning to become an active participant in the cosmic symphony rather than just being played by it. Sacred geometry visualization takes this work even deeper. Instead of avoiding cubic symbolism, embrace it consciously. Visualize yourself inside a perfect cube, but now you're aware of its structure. See light entering through each face, transforming the walls from barriers into windows. Practice expanding your awareness to fill the entire space. Then, beyond it. The cube becomes a launching point for consciousness rather than a prison. This leads to the great paradox of surrender. The more you fight Saturn's influence, the more solid the cube becomes. But when you accept its lessons with full awareness, its limiting power begins to dissolve. This isn't passive resignation. It's conscious cooperation with the forces shaping your experience. You're no longer victim to circumstances, but co-creator with cosmic intelligence. Conscious co-creation means using Saturnian energy as a tool for spiritual expression, rather than seeing it as an obstacle. Discipline becomes devotion. Structure becomes sacred architecture. Time becomes a canvas for divine artistry. You're still operating within the cube, but now you understand its purpose and can work with it skillfully. As this integration deepens, the cube becomes increasingly transparent. Time stops feeling oppressive and starts revealing its gift, the ability to experience sequential unfoldment of consciousness. Karma transforms from punishment into a precise map showing exactly what needs attention for continued growth. Material life becomes a stage where infinite awareness explores itself through finite forms. This is why ancient mystery schools used cubic symbolism in their temples. The cube represents the perfected human consciousness that has learned to work with limitation as a creative force, rather than fighting it as an enemy. You're not transcending the physical world, you're finally learning to inhabit it fully, as an awakened being. The path of liberation is never complete, because consciousness itself is infinite. Each level of mastery reveals new depths to explore. The cube you've transformed becomes the foundation for engaging with even more subtle structures of reality. This is the real meaning of spiritual development. Not escape from form, but ever-deepening mastery of how consciousness expresses itself through limitation. Your awakening doesn't end with personal liberation. As you transform your internal cube, you begin affecting the collective field. Others sense the possibility you embody and begin questioning their own limitations. This is how real change spreads, not through preaching or force, but through the quiet demonstration of what becomes possible when someone learns to dance with the very forces they once feared. The black cube of Saturn evokes reactions unlike any other symbol in human consciousness. Some feel drawn to it with an almost magnetic fascination, sensing profound mysteries hidden within its geometric perfection. Others recoil instinctively, experiencing waves of dread or suspicion when confronted with its dark presence. Religious minds might approach it with reverence, while conspiracy theorists view it with deep mistrust. But here's what most people miss entirely. These intense reactions reveal far more about the observer than they do about the symbol itself. When you feel fear looking at the cube, you're encountering your own relationship with limitation and structure. When you sense reverence, you're touching something in yourself that recognizes the sacred nature of boundaries and form. The cube becomes a cosmic mirror, reflecting your consciousness back to itself with startling clarity. This is why the same symbol can appear both in ancient temples as an object of worship and in modern corporate logos as a tool of control. We've been trained to think in absolutes, good versus evil, light versus dark, freedom versus oppression. This dualistic thinking keeps us trapped in endless mental battles, always trying to categorize reality into neat boxes of right and wrong. But Saturn and his cube operate beyond these simplistic classifications. They exist in a realm that transcends our need to label everything as either beneficial or harmful. The cube becomes oppressive only when consciousness remains unconscious. When we identify completely with form, with our jobs, our social roles, our possessions, our thoughts, we forget the formless spirit that animates all existence. In this state of spiritual amnesia, Saturn's influence feels crushing. His limitations seem like prison walls, rather than protective boundaries. His discipline appears as punishment, rather than purification. But this is precisely Saturn's genius. He functions as a cosmic refiner, not a cosmic oppressor. His discipline strips away illusions and false identities to reveal your authentic, spiritual nature. Think of him as that harsh but loving teacher who demanded excellence from you, the one you probably resented at the time but later recognized as instrumental to your growth. Saturn's energy works the same way on a soul level. The same cube that imprisons the unconscious becomes a sacred tool for the awakened. When you understand its true nature, it provides structure for spiritual practice. Those daily meditation sessions, that commitment to ethical living, the boundaries you set to protect your energy, these are all expressions of the cube's constructive power. It creates safe containers for exploring higher consciousness and presents exactly the challenges needed for genuine evolution. Ancient alchemists understood this principle deeply. Any poison can become medicine through proper understanding and application. Saturn's heavy, restrictive energy transforms into the foundation for mastery, discipline, and profound wisdom when approached with the right consciousness. The lead of limitation becomes the gold of spiritual attainment. This is why traditional cultures approach Saturn with reverence rather than fear. They offered sacrifices not from superstition, but in recognition of his essential role in cosmic order and soul development. They understood that without Saturn's structuring influence, consciousness would remain scattered and unfocused, unable to achieve the concentration necessary for spiritual breakthrough. The cube serves as a gatekeeper between dimensions of reality. It tests your readiness for higher consciousness by presenting exactly the obstacles your soul needs to overcome. When you're prepared to transcend a particular limitation, Saturn provides the perfect circumstances to practice that transcendence. When you're still learning a specific lesson, he maintains the pressure until integration occurs. Look around at our modern world, and you'll see cube symbolism everywhere, in architecture, corporate logos, technology interfaces, even children's toys. This isn't necessarily evidence of some vast conspiracy, though unconscious forces certainly play a role. Instead, it reflects humanity's collective engagement with these Saturnian energies. We're working through our relationship with structure, authority, and limitation on a species level. Some of these manifestations amplify unconscious patterns, keeping people trapped in cycles of consumption and external validation. Others provide genuine frameworks for growth and achievement. The cube itself remains neutral. It simply amplifies whatever level of consciousness engages with it. An unconscious person, encountering cube symbolism, might feel compelled toward mindless conformity. An awakened individual might use the same symbol as a reminder to maintain spiritual discipline. The ultimate revelation is that the cube exists within you. It is your own consciousness structure, your relationship with limitation and form, your capacity to transform challenge into wisdom, your ability to use boundaries as springboards rather than barriers. The external cubes you encounter in temples, buildings, and symbols are merely reflections of this internal architecture. When you recognize the cube as your own spiritual technology, everything changes. Those limitations that once felt oppressive become opportunities for creative problem solving. The discipline that seemed restrictive reveals itself as the pathway to genuine freedom. The structure that appeared confining transforms into a sacred geometry supporting your highest expression. This is Saturn's ultimate gift, teaching you that consciousness itself is the key to transformation. The same circumstances that imprison one person liberate another, depending entirely on the level of awareness brought to the situation. The cube doesn't need to be destroyed or escaped from. It needs to be understood, integrated, and consciously employed in service of spiritual evolution. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."